Today's walk is around the village of Pottersbury. Here's the High Street and the village hall, and along there that sign says Firtho Bridle Way, and that's a very nice walk across the fields when it's not muddy like today to the lost medieval village of Firtho. There's an old church there, a newly built manor house and a dovecot. So we're going down here now, briefly past the church and down to the Methodist chapel. United Reformed Church. Here it is. It was built in 1780. A bit of a graveyard behind it, and this was the manse where the rector lived. Private apartments now. I don't even know whether it's still used. It looks a bit dingy, doesn't it? And there's this little graveyard there for the non-conformists, as they were called. This used to be a pub called the Blue Ball Inn, not Blue Bell, as quite a lot of people think, and it closed in 1912. We're going up here now to the church and across the road the old rectory. A lovely thatch building, the old vicarage. And there we have the church of St Nicholas. We'll go through there later, but we're just going to have a look at this statue here. Apparently a tree was felled in 2019 and a local artist made this statue of Saint Teresa. Looks a bit sort of Roman Catholic, doesn't it? But it's in the church grounds, and yeah, it's wooden, made from a felled tree. What do we know about this church? It's mostly 12th and 13th century, and the Duke of Grafton, who lived at Wakefield Lodge just down the road, he paid for a lot of renovations and work to be done in the late 19th century. Snowdrops, and the clock, which we'll see in a minute, was 1887 for the Jubilee of Queen Victoria. There it is. Lots of old graves. And then the mill is just down there in the corner. The mill by the little stream. Obviously now apartments. There was mention of a mill here in the Domesday Book, and also records of a working mill in 1690. But this present one was built 1850 after a fire. It was one of the biggest in the area. 4 millstones powered by water from the brook and a steam engine. It was in use until 1960, and it was 1985 when they were converted into 3 dwellings. It is a listed building. And we'll just spin round there. You can see the brook and the church. We've just come up Church Lane onto the High Street, and old maps show that this the site of many pottery kilns from the 13th and 14th century. They made cooking pots, bowls, jugs, pitchers, bottles, and also roof tiles. So we'll point some out along the way, and that's why it's called Pottersbury. This is 102 High Street, and this is where the earliest kiln has been found, in the garden there. We're coming up to the coach yard. There was 5 kilns found here, so it's likened to a small factory really. Can't go down because it's private, but yeah, 5 kilns, and there's more behind 28 High Street, which is just down here. And this is Cottage Stores. There's been a shop of one description on this site for years and years. In its heyday, there was 3 bakehouses, 6 pubs, 7 sweet shops, 3 butchers, 4 general stores, a post office, 3 dairies, and an undertaker. This development here, which used to be a meadow, as you can tell from the street sign, was built in 1968. And over here we have houses built by the Duke of Grafton, 1840, and that there at number 57 used to be the old school. This row of houses is actually called Duchess Row, and that's reflected in that street name there, Duchess Gardens. And then over here we have Grafton Terrace, again built by the Duke of Grafton, 4th Duke of Grafton, to house some of his workers. Can't really see it with these vans here. We'll have a look further on. There we are, a better view of Grafton Terrace. Erected 1840, it says on the nameplate. The local pub, the Cock Inn. A lot of pubs around these parts were called the Cock, probably because they used to have cockfighting. And then over here there's a row of cottages called Pretoria Cottages, and they were built at the time of the Boer War. I think that was one of the battles that we won, or the British won. Maze Way, again the clue's in the name. There was a transport cafe on the A5 called Maze, and so this road was called Maze because it was knocked down in the early 60s when the A5 really was eclipsed by the motorway, the M1 being built, so the A5 wasn't as busy. Some old cottages across here leading us down to the A5. And number 26, I don't know if you can see that, actually says the old bakery. Oh, number 20, sorry. And then along here is somewhere called the Retreat that used to be the butchers, and there was slaughterhouse, I suppose you'd call it, at the back. And this was a butcher's for many years. The Retreat. And we're coming on to the A5 now. So this is the Retreat, which is sort of built sideways on, isn't it? This is the outbuildings for Elm Field Farmhouse. I walked through here once thinking that it was a pathway really, and a lady came out and sternly told me that it was private property, so we won't risk that again. It was built in 1700 and it's grade 2 listed. We'll have a look round the front, and across the road there, the cream building with the green windows is called Anchor House, and that used to be a grocery. Yeah, there's the front of the house. And I always thought it was strange being called Anchor House when you couldn't really get much farther away from the sea. But where that new build house is there on the corner, that used to be a pub called the Anchor. And when they knocked it down, they built a couple of new houses, and that house next door took on the name of the Anchor. We've just crossed the A5 now at the end of High Street, and here's Greystone Lodge. It used to be called Hill House. Beautiful big building in there. And it was the estate house of the Duke of Grafton. Now just along there, it's grade 2 listed, early 19th century. So just along here on the right is a huge estate called Wakefield Lawn. And it's the seat of the Duke of Grafton, who did an awful lot for the village. Whittlebury Forest was part of it. Henry VIII came here. It's got a really long history. But in the 1920s, the estate was sold for death duties. And it's in private hands now, and they're not too keen on you walking through it, even though there's a public footpath. Deer roam freely. There's a Palladian-style house in there, a huge lake, and it's said that Capability Brown, whose real name was Lancelot, he designed the gardens in 1948-50. Old Bakehouse Farm, so one of the many bakehouses that they had in Pottersbury. And in those days, we've got Old Bakehouse Cottage. Fairly recently really, Victorian days, 1920s, people they rarely had their own oven in the kitchen, so they used to take the jointed beef and potatoes and whatever else to the bakehouse to be cooked. Now this used to be the Reindeer Inn. I think that's meant to be a reindeer there. It's now private apartments, and it used to be stables. Well, you can see there stables, coaching, busy inn on the Watling Street. Then it was an antique centre, but it isn't an inn anymore. It's called Reindeer Court, and this was the inn. I think you can still see where the sign used to hang from. This is the Old Talbot. It's still classed as Pottersbury, even though it's up the Watling Street going towards Toaster. It's been here since the 17th century, and as you can see, the level of the road has been built up considerably, so it appears to be down there now. It was expanded apparently in the 1960s to include a restaurant. I don't think certainly not lately, it's not done too well. When Watling Street was full of coaches going past, and then latterly cars before the M1 came, it would have been really busy. A stopping off place, big car park. There was stables behind. Sadly, it's closed at the moment. This is known as Poundfield Road because over there was the animal pound. Animals were always getting lost or running free in the 19th and 18th century. So they were gathered up and put there. And this is Pottersbury House that I was saying all that land was sold off. It's a Victorian stone-built house, beautifully kept, and it was built in Victorian days by a bookmaker. Been unable to find his actual name, but it was known locally as Swindler's Hall, which is perhaps a little bit unfair, isn't it? And here's the sign, in case we forget where we are. Pottersbury. And you can see the pots there on the sign for which it was famous. And a nice bench over there, an iron bench that was 1953 that was built. And there's another view of the house. There is farther along the Watling Street towards Toaster, there's somewhere called Pottersbury Lodge, which again is a beautiful building, slightly older than this one, and that is now a specialist school for autistic children. This is known as the cottage. It's a big cottage, isn't it? It was connected to Pottersbury House, and it was in the early 20th century the home of Miss Crawford from the Crawford Crackers fame. Really old wall. We're nearly back to where we started now. That's Firtho Lane, which I mentioned before, the lost medieval village. Over there is the village hall, which is normally quite active with plays and bingo and whist drives and that sort of thing. And yeah, here's where we started on the high street. We're just going round the corner to look at the graveyard. We're on High Street here, and these gates were made at the foundry in Deanshanger, one of the last things they made just before it closed. As happens in a lot of these villages, the graveyard attached to the church gets pretty full, and this is the overspill. Beautiful crocuses and some really old graves. I'm going to have a snoop round, but thank you for joining me. I'll be making more soon, rambling on somewhere else. Hope you enjoyed it. If you do, you can always subscribe for free or like it. Thank you. Bye. Just a couple of quick amendments to my ramble on around Pottersbury. I did mention Capability Lancelot Brown said he designed the gardens at Wakefield Lodge. I think I said 1948 to 50. Obviously he didn't live to be more than 200 years old. It should have been 1748 to 50. And when I discussed how the manor house had sold off their gardens for building some years ago, I said that it was called Mansion Way. It's actually called Mansion Gardens. Thank you. Bye.